had just moved back home after college, hoping to save some money and get my life in order. My dad had remarried while I was away. Some woman named Alyssa, who looked more like an Instagram model than a housewife. She was young, way younger than my dad. First I thought he just got lucky. But over time things started to feel off. She was always overly friendly with me. Too many compliments. Too many accidental touches. Her laughter at my jokes felt forced, like she was trying too hard to build some sort of connection. I brushed it off, told myself I was overthinking. But then I started noticing patterns. My dad worked long hours, and whenever he was out, Alyssa was suddenly busy. Working from home, she said, but I never saw any real work happening. I never saw a laptop open, no video calls, no documents. Just her lounging around in tight clothes, scrolling through her phone or stepping out for mysterious errands. Then came that one day. I'd left school early after a cancelled class. When I got home, the front door was unlocked, which was weird since Alyssa was always meticulous about locking up. As I stepped inside, I heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. Not loud, but enough to make me freeze. Something between muffled laughter and something else. I crept up the stairs, trying not to make a sound. When I reached the hallway, I stopped outside the master bedroom. The door was closed. I pressed my ear to it, heart pounding. The noises were clearer now. Soft moans, occasional giggles. Then silence. A step. I panicked and tiptoed back downstairs before anyone could notice. I sat in the living room for an hour pretending to scroll on my phone while my mind raced. Eventually Alyssa came down, hair slightly messy, wearing a robe. She smiled at me like nothing happened. "Didn't know you were home," she said casually. I nodded, pretending not to care. But my chest felt like it was going to explode. I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't prove anything yet, but my instincts were screaming. And when your gut won't shut up, you start paying attention. Little details stick. How she always looked perfect when Dad was away, how she rushed to the laundry right after work, and how she was suddenly buying new perfume and expensive makeup brands. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid there staring at the ceiling, replaying the sounds, the look on her face, her robe, her tone. Everything was wrong, but no one else seemed to notice. Maybe they didn't want to. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was happening in that house, and if no one else was going to figure it out, I would. I just didn't realize what I was getting myself into. After that day, I started watching her closely. Alyssa had this way of pretending everything was normal, like she wasn't hiding anything. But once I started paying attention, the cracks showed. She'd get dressed like she was going to a club just to run errands. Tight skirts, heels, low-cut tops. Nothing about her look said grocery store. And every time she left the house, she'd spend almost an hour getting ready. I checked her supposed job profile online. No posts, no updates. She claimed to be in marketing, but there was zero proof of any real work. She started talking to me more, lingering in the kitchen, laughing at things that weren't funny. Her hands would brush mine when there was no reason to touch. She'd ask me weird questions. If I had a girlfriend, what kind of women I liked, if I thought older women were more confident. I'd laugh it off, but my stomach was always in knots. The more she flirted, the more I knew she was trying to distract me from something. Then I found the second phone. It was buried under laundry in the guest room. At first I thought it was mine. I'd lost an old one a while back. But when I powered it on, it wasn't. It had no lock, just messages from men. Some saved as initials, others as usernames. Pictures, voice notes, hotel receipts. I didn't even know how to process it. I put it back exactly how I found it, like I hadn't seen a thing, but inside I was spiraling. A few days later, she told my dad she was going to a friend's birthday. The way she said it didn't sit right with me. I waited a few minutes after she left, then followed her. I stayed back a few cars, kept it low-key. She drove across the city and parked outside a luxury hotel. I watched her walk in, head high, like she belonged there. She was wearing something that looked more like lingerie than a dress. I sat in the parking lot for nearly 2 hours. I should have left, but I couldn't. When she finally came out, she wasn't alone. A guy in a suit walked beside her, laughing, holding her waist. He kissed her on the cheek, handed her what looked like a small envelope, then walked away. She got into her car, completely unaware I had seen everything. I went home before she did. When she walked in later that night, she looked at me and smiled like nothing had happened. "Had a great time," she said. I nodded, heart racing, pretending to be half asleep on the couch. Every part of me wanted to scream at her, but I didn't. Not yet. I should have just exposed her. Told my dad. Thrown her out of our lives. But I didn't. Because part of me wasn't just angry. I was curious. And that curiosity, it was about to drag me into something darker than I ever expected. The next morning I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until my dad left for work, then went straight to her. No games. I told her I saw everything, the hotel, the guy, the envelope. For a second she looked stunned. Then she dropped the act. Her face didn't twist in shame or fear. It just softened like she was relieved. She didn't deny it. Instead, she sat down and said, "You weren't supposed to find out like this." She told me my dad hadn't touched her in over a year. Said their marriage was nothing more than an arrangement, that he needed someone to look stable for business, and she needed a way to pay off debt. She claimed they barely spoke anymore unless it was about bills or appearances. I wanted to believe she was manipulating me, but the way she said it, it didn't sound like a lie. Sounded like defeat. I told her she could have just left instead of sneaking around. She looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "Why didn't you tell him when you found out?" That shut me up. Because I didn't. I didn't tell him. And deep down, I knew it wasn't just to protect him. It was because I was obsessed. Drawn to her. Every warning sign I had ignored wasn't just about suspicion. It was about attraction I didn't want to admit. The line blurred completely the night she walked into my room. She didn't say a word. Just closed the door behind her, sat beside me and kissed me. I should have pushed her away. I didn't. I kissed her back. What started as confusion turned into heat. Then something worse. I didn't think. I didn't care. I convinced myself she was just using me, and that made it okay somehow. But it didn't stop at once. It became a routine. Every time my dad was out, she'd find a reason to be alone with me. And every time I gave in, the guilt was unbearable. Every time I looked at my dad, I felt sick. But I couldn't stop. I told myself it was just temporary, that it would end soon. But I was lying to myself. We were lying to each other. It wasn't about love. It was power, lust, and secrecy. We weren't in control anymore. We were addicted to the risk, to the damage. And the more we got away with it, the more reckless we became. Then came the message. I didn't see it, but I knew when it happened. My dad's face changed. He was quiet, distant. He left without a word, no explanation, no destination. Alyssa panicked, checking her phone, pacing the living room. I didn't know what he saw, but it didn't matter. It was over. He knew. And everything we had done was about to come crashing down. He was gone for 3 days. No calls. No messages. Alyssa was unraveling. She tried to act calm, but I saw the panic. She kept checking her phone, staring at the front door, jumping at every sound. I didn't say anything. What could I say? We both knew we crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. When he finally came back, he didn't speak to either of us. He walked past us like we didn't exist. That silence hit harder than any scream. I wanted him to yell, to confront me, to do anything. But he didn't. He just existed in the same space, hollow and cold. I don't know what exactly he saw. Maybe messages, maybe photos, maybe both. But it was enough. Alyssa tried to talk to him. Apologized. Cried. He didn't flinch. He slept in the guest room. Took meals alone. Avoided eye contact. She stopped talking to me entirely. Whatever we had between us died the moment he walked through that door. It wasn't passion anymore, it was shame. Few days later she left. No goodbye, no explanation. Just packed a few bags and drove off. I didn't stop her. I didn't even ask where she was going. It didn't matter. The damage was done. I had this fantasy that once she was gone, things would go back to normal. But they didn't. My dad never asked me anything directly, but his eyes said everything. Disappointment. Betrayal. A kind of heartbreak I didn't think was possible from a man like him. We lived like strangers after that. Same house, different worlds. He never spoke about her again, and I never brought her name up. Couldn't. The guilt had rotted through me. I tried to justify it at first, told myself she used me, manipulated me, that I was just a pawn in her twisted game. But none of that erased the fact that I let it happen. That I wanted it. I started going to therapy months later. Not because someone told me to, but because I couldn't carry the weight anymore. I didn't just lose trust. I lost the version of myself I used to respect. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. Someone who crossed every moral line for something that never even meant anything. Sometimes people ask if I'd do it differently if I had the chance. The truth. I don't know. That's the part that scares me the most. Not what I did, but the fact that part of me doesn't regret it the way I should. There's something broken in that, and I'm still figuring out how to live with it. I learned that infidelity doesn't always start with lust. Sometimes it starts with curiosity, with silence, with loneliness. And when the dust settles, it's not just about who you hurt, it's about who you become. And I became someone I never thought I'd be.